I craft everything. Hi everyone, my name is Tasha from I Craft Everything, and today we will be learning how to sublimate a baby blanket. If you are a returning subscriber, thank you so much for stopping by and crafting with me. I love you all to pieces. And if you are new here, please be sure to hit that like and subscribe button. Thank you so much for stopping by. I can't wait to craft something beautiful with you guys. So as you can see, I've taken my heat press and run it across the baby blanket to eliminate some of the crinkles and bumps. I'm going to take the sublimation paper and lay it face down on the baby blanket, making sure to line all of the edges of the paper and all of the edges of the blanket so that they are completely straight. Please keep in mind that the exact way that you lay your sublimation paper is the exact way it'll turn out. So if it's crooked or not in the correct place, you can't change that. So be sure to lay it right the first time. Grab your heat tape and begin cutting pieces. Take the tape and individually place the strips along the paper and the blanket, making sure the tape firmly attaches to the blanket. It's really important to make sure that your paper stays aligned to the edges of the blanket. So be sure as you lay your tape down that you double check to make sure that everything is properly in its place. Use as much tape as you're comfortable with to make sure that it's properly attached to the sublimation paper and baby blanket. I like to attach my tape along the edges, the top and bottom, as well as the corners. Since we're starting on the left side of the blanket, gently tug the corner and push the sublimation paper inside of its place. This will ensure that when you press it, it comes out perfectly. If you haven't already, go ahead and turn your heat press on to the desired temperature. Be sure to check the setting requirements on the blanket that you chose to make sure that you use them appropriately. This particular blanket requires 400 degrees heat to sublimate onto the blanket for about 20 to 30 seconds, depending on if you're using a heat press or an easy press. Take your butcher paper or heat safe paper and lay it on top of the taped down sublimation paper. This doesn't have to necessarily be straight since it acts as a barrier between the sublimation paper and the heat press, which you'll see in just a moment. Take your heat press and apply it to the top left-hand corner of your blanket. Be sure to make your heat settings appropriate based off of the instructions from your blanket. For this one, I'm using about 20 seconds. Once your heat press dings, move it to the next section of the paper, making sure that you cover all pieces of the sublimation paper with heat. This will ensure that the ink presses firmly on the blanket. As the heat starts to make its way from the blanket, butcher paper, and sublimation paper, you'll start to see more of the design come through on the butcher paper. This is normal and it just lets you know that your item is pressing properly. If you're like me and you have an Easy Press that's smaller than the sheet of paper, be sure to pick up your press and move it along all of the individual parts of the paper. It's really important to make sure that the heat from the press touches every single nook and cranny, so you can pick this up and move it several times to make sure you've applied enough heat. After I've pressed the design all the way around the paper, I like to go back through and double check to make sure I applied enough heat throughout the whole thing. I usually leave it on for about 5 to 7 seconds, intermittently moving it across the paper. This will make sure that if I missed any spots, I get to hit those spots and they have heat appropriately. You can tell when this is complete when you look at the design and see it has printed on the outside of the sublimation paper. But I like to play peekaboo with my design just to make sure I didn't miss any parts. Now would be a good time to apply a little bit more heat for a longer amount of time if you can see in your peekaboo that it's not properly heated. If you're sure the design has laid properly all across the blanket, go ahead and gently lift the paper off of the blanket. As you can see, the ink has bled through the front and back of the sublimation paper, letting you know that you were successful at your task. Go ahead and remove any additional tape and straighten your blanket and get ready to do this process again. Remember when I told you it was important to align your sublimation paper along the corners and edges of the blanket? This is important because you'll have to lay the next sheet of sublimation paper directly next to the first one. It's also important to make sure that you tape it down along the edges. Be sure to lay your next sheet of sublimation paper directly next to the ending of where your first design stopped. Once you've laid your paper exactly where you'd like it to be, go ahead and take your heat tape and follow the same steps from the first time. You'll be sure that this corner aligns properly with the bottom corner of the previous design, and you'll also make sure that the edges are properly laid. Don't forget to make sure your heat tape is firmly attached to the sublimation paper and baby blanket. Again, this will prevent the sublimation paper from moving or sliding when you apply the heat press. So it's very important that you make sure to press it down and make sure you keep it aligned properly. It does have the potential to scoot or move as you lay it and as you press it. So it's important to press it down. Once you have made sure that your heat tape, blanket, and paper are secure, you can grab a new piece of butcher paper, or if you're experienced, grab the same piece of butcher paper and lay it on top. Be sure that you lay it in the same direction facing up that it was when you initially laid it to avoid the bleed from getting onto your blanket. Just like last time, once your time is up, go ahead and pick up your heat press and move it to the next section of the blanket. You can do it for the desired time, and once you've completed that, then you go in and just move it around for a few seconds at a time. Make sure that the heat is spread equally to every part of the sublimation paper. This will make sure that the ink transfers from the paper directly to the blanket all over. It's important that you do this process as you go to make sure that you don't miss a beat. Once you have equally distributed the heat across the sublimation paper, go ahead and do your peekaboo test to make sure that the ends of the design have printed successfully on your blanket. If it hasn't, then you can apply heat for a little bit longer. But if it has, then you can go ahead and begin lifting up the paper. Again, you can tell that this was completed because the design will have transferred onto your blanket, and also your sublimation paper will appear dim. Okay, our blanket is coming together nicely. As you can see, that second sheet laid perfectly next to the first sheet. So now we're just going to go ahead and crinkle the blanket to move it down, kind of like an assembly line. And you're going to take your next sheet of paper and align it to the corners and tape it firmly. Once your tape and paper are laid exactly where you want them, go ahead and take your butcher or heat safe paper and lay it on top of your sublimation paper. Be sure that you don't have any parts of the blanket in the way underneath the sublimation paper that you are laying, because that ink from that paper will transfer to that section of the blanket. So it's really important to make sure that you have the completed section of the blanket out of the way and you're starting fresh on the section that you're working on. Go ahead and apply your heat press to this section and follow the steps as previously given. Now I know we have a little section left on the right hand side of the blanket that we have not completed, but don't worry, we're going to come back to that in a little while. Go ahead and take your blanket and push it up, and we're going to start underneath the very first section that we did. Be sure to make sure that your sublimation paper is firmly in the corner of the edge of that blanket. You can definitely tell if the paper moves or if you don't apply it properly, because it will look crooked. So it is very important that you align the edges of the paper to the edges of the blanket. It's kind of like a bumper that's there to keep the paper from going over. You can put it over if you choose to, but I like to keep mine nice and neat and leave the edges just edges. But the choice is yours. It's totally up to you how you like to do that. Not sure if you guys noticed, but the edge of my paper is cut off because it came through the printer and the printer kind of ripped the paper. So instead of me throwing the whole sheet of paper away, I just clipped off the part that was to go in that section, and I can come back and fill it in later without printing a whole sheet of paper. You'll see what I mean at the end of the video. Since the steps for applying the next few sheets of paper are the same as previously given, I'm going to go ahead and speed up this video so that you can go ahead and get to the end of the project. We are almost done, y'all. Can you see how beautiful this blanket is turning out to be? I hope the mama that gets it loves this blanket. It turned out so cute. So now that we're at the end of the blanket, you can either change the size of the sheet of paper you'll be using, or if you're wanting to continue using the 8.5 by 14 sheet of paper, you just cut around the places that you know are going to appear on your blanket. You can either use a measuring tape or you can eyeball it to see exactly how big that design should be in that section. Be sure to align it properly, and if there are spaces, don't worry, we can go back and fill those in later. Be very careful not to cut any of the ink because you will see that on your blanket. What you see on the sheet of paper is what you'll see once you lay it down. So be careful to align it properly and don't cut out any of the ink on the paper unless you don't want it to appear in that section. The empty spaces at the bottom will be filled in, so don't worry about that. As you can see, the sublimation paper is a little bit longer than the bumper or corner of the blanket, so I'm going to go ahead and cut that additional off. It looks like it's going to print weird, but you'll see in just a minute, and I'll go back in and fill in any empty spaces. It's really important to make sure that you remove any pieces that you do not want to print onto your blanket. Remember, what is on the blanket will print on the blanket if you accidentally leave that paper there, so be sure to move it. I did get another piece of butcher paper though. As you run out of printing space on the blanket, go ahead and repeat the same steps from the last section. Don't worry about the blank spaces. Like I said, we'll go back and fill those in later. Just be sure to align your paper exactly next to the previous section to make sure that it prints properly. Just like before, play peekaboo with your print to make sure that everything transfers onto the blanket exactly correct. Once you've confirmed that, you can go ahead and pull it up and put that paper to the side. Now we're at the edge where you can see it is totally blank from the bottom to the top. We're about to fill this section in with all of the little pieces that we cut along the way. Let's go. If you have any whole sheets of paper left, then you can go ahead and use those too. Just be sure to cut them section by section and make sure, like I said before, that you do not cut any of the ink that you want to transfer onto the blanket. You will be able to see that just as you see it on the paper, on the blanket, if you choose to press it down that way. So I'm choosing to cut them section by section just to make sure that I can apply them to the blanket properly. Okay, y'all, we are at the home stretch, and right now we are just applying some of the little pieces to the empty spaces on the blanket. You can go ahead and cut around and play with it and put it exactly where you feel like it should be. For the most part, the blanket is pretty busy, so if you decide to get creative towards the end, you really won't be able to tell, but I like to keep it all symmetrical. Be careful not to overlap the sublimation paper. Remember, what you press is what you're going to get in real life. So it's important to keep each individual part of the sublimation paper separate from the other. You can do this one at a time if you're very new to the process, or if you're a little bit more experienced, then you can attach it all at once. The choice is up to you. Once I have all the individual pieces of sublimation paper down, I like to take the butcher paper and put it on top and go ahead and heat that section. Doesn't really matter how many individual pieces of sublimation paper you put down, as long as they are all firmly attached to the blanket and you make sure they're not overlapping, then you'll be good to go. It should pull up perfect. At this point, if you see a blank spot, go ahead and cut out a piece of the paper that you think will fit and plug it in there. Just be sure to make sure that it is turned the right way. Okay, this is literally the last chunk of the blanket that we're about to do. So you go ahead and cut the section that you'd like to appear in that space. Please be sure that you do not overlap the sublimation paper with another sheet. Make sure that you firmly press the design down with heat tape, and also make sure that you apply enough heat, and keep in mind that any mistake that is made at the top of the blanket is much more likely to be spotted than on the bottom or the middle. So please keep that in mind. Because I'm a perfectionist, I'm just going to plug in some of those little bitty spaces that I feel like I might have missed just to make sure that no section of the blanket appears to be missing anything. This is optional. It's just something I like to do to make sure the blanket is nice and full, but it does get the job done. And voila, our sublimation baby blanket is complete. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up button and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Thank you guys so much for stopping by. I really enjoyed crafting this baby blanket with you. And if you have any questions or comments, be sure to leave them in the comment section. I can't wait to see you next time. Bye.